Friends, thank you for being here today. We are living in an era where the nature of warfare is changing faster than our ability to comprehend it. Today, Iran has deployed a ballistic missile capable of splitting into multiple independent warheads mid-flight, and the stark, deeply uncomfortable reality is that the United States and its allies currently possess no viable, sustainable way to stop it. When we observe the modern battlefield on our television screens, it is very easy to become captivated by the sheer spectacle of American technology. We see the roar of a supersonic interceptor leaving its launch tube, the synchronized glow of a radar screen in a command bunker, and the complex algorithms predicting a missile's flight path. We take comfort in these images, but war, stripped of its visual drama and technological mystique, is fundamentally an exercise in economics and mathematics. It is a cold ledger of costs, resources, and sustainable attrition. Today, we need to examine a profoundly disturbing shift in that ledger. We are going to explore how a single, relatively low-cost weapon has the potential to instantly bankrupt a billion-dollar defense grid and exhaust our most advanced interceptor stockpiles in a matter of days. The challenge we face is not merely a tactical puzzle for generals to solve, it is a strategic crisis. We have to ask ourselves how we can protect our forces, our infrastructure, and our allies from an adversary that has successfully turned the very arithmetic of modern warfare against us. As we break down these numbers today, I want to hear your perspective. Do you think our current defense strategy is sustainable? Let me know in the comments below as we dive into the data. To truly grasp the magnitude of this threat, let us step away from the abstract strategy for a moment and look at the precise sequence of events that unfolds during an attack. Imagine the environment inside a hardened air defense command bunker somewhere in the Middle East. You are an American missile defense operator, highly trained, perhaps tasked with managing a Patriot or THAAD battery protecting a critical airfield or a densely populated city. Your radar screen, powered by some of the most sophisticated phased array technology ever created, detects a launch from deep inside Iranian territory. It registers a single incoming ballistic track. To your combat systems and to your training, it is one threat requiring one solution. Operating under strict time-compressed protocols, you authorize the firing of an advanced hit-to-kill interceptor. You have just committed a national asset worth roughly $3 to $4 million to destroy this singular threat in the upper atmosphere. For decades, this has been the established, reliable paradigm of Western missile defense. You detect the launch, your computers calculate the parabolic trajectory, and you place a kinetic kill vehicle directly in its path. It is often compared to hitting a speeding bullet with another speeding bullet, and we are incredibly good at it. But then, something happens that no conventional missile defense system in the world was economically or computationally designed to handle. At an altitude of approximately 23,000 feet, the logic of the entire engagement completely collapses. The incoming Iranian Khorramshahr-4 missile, also known as the K-bar, initiates a program separation sequence. The heavy warhead casing splits apart in midair. In a fraction of a second, what was a single, predictable radar track becomes 20. 20 separate, distinct objects, each carrying roughly 2.5 kilograms of high explosives, are dispersed outward in a rapid, fan-like pattern. A heartbeat later, the $4 million interceptor you just fired streaks through the sky and successfully collides with its target. But it has merely destroyed the empty container. The lethal contents are already gone, continuing their descent. What follows is an inescapable physical reality. These newly released submunitions have no internal guidance systems. They have no radar seekers to be jammed and no electronic signals to be spoofed by our defense networks. They simply do not need them. Relying entirely on the kinetic energy of their ballistic re-entry, they just fall, and they scatter across a devastatingly wide footprint, typically an area roughly 16 kilometers in diameter. They rain down across the footprint of an entire city sector, striking residential rooftops, tearing through parked vehicles, cratering suburban streets, and peppering the runways of military installations. The defenders, who executed their jobs perfectly and fired one interceptor to stop one missile, now face 20 separate explosive threats plunging toward the ground. Threats that nobody intercepted because, at that stage of flight, nobody physically could. And the nightmare does not end when the air raid sirens stop. A certain percentage of these cluster munitions are mathematically guaranteed to fail to detonate on impact. They land intact, armed, and highly volatile. They become de facto landmines, scattered randomly across civilian and military infrastructure. A child playing in a garden days later, a utility worker attempting to restore power, or an airman clearing debris from a runway. Any of them could trigger an unexploded bomblet left behind by the cluster warhead. The weapon leaves a persistent, lethal landscape long after the initial attack concludes. This is not a theoretical wargame played in the halls of the Pentagon. It is the operational reality of the Khorramshahr-4. It is a direct, calculated assault on the entire foundation of Western missile defense. If we want to understand exactly why the United States finds itself in this vulnerable position, we have to look past the hardware and examine the balance sheet. The United States military is built upon a foundation of technological supremacy. We build the finest, most capable defense systems on Earth. But that level of excellence comes at an extraordinary financial and industrial cost. Let us look at the numbers. Every missile defense system operates on the same fundamental economic principle: detect the threat, calculate its trajectory, and fire an interceptor that is fast enough, accurate enough, and expensive enough to destroy the target. The Patriot PASI-3 MSE interceptor, which forms the absolute backbone of American and Allied terminal phase missile defense, costs approximately $4 million per individual missile. The Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 interceptors, jointly developed with Israel to engage threats in the upper atmosphere and space, cost between $3 million and $10 million each. The American THAAD system, designed for high-altitude intercepts, fires missiles that also cost well over $10 million apiece. Now, consider the adversary's side of this strategic equation. The Khorramshahr-4 is estimated to cost the Iranian military complex approximately $1 million to manufacture. When an adversary fires a $1 million missile, and the defender must spend a $4 million or $10 million interceptor to stop it, there is already a massive economic disadvantage built into the transaction before a single explosion occurs. Defense analysts refer to this as the cost exchange ratio. A 4-to-1 or 10-to-1 disadvantage is painful, but for a wealthy superpower like the United States, it has historically been considered an acceptable price to pay to protect human life and shield critical multi-billion-dollar assets like aircraft carriers or command centers. We have always been willing to outspend the enemy to save American lives. However, the submunition capability of the Khorramshahr-4 shatters this acceptable ratio into pieces. When that $1 million missile opens at 23,000 feet and disperses 20 separate explosive threats, or, according to claims by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, up to 80 submunitions, the mathematical reality becomes catastrophic. In a live defensive environment, an operator cannot simply ignore incoming radar tracks. They do not know until it is too late which incoming piece of metal is a harmless decoy and which is a lethal explosive. They must treat every credible track as a threat to the people below. If a single $1 million missile deploys 20 submunitions, and the defense system attempts to intercept them to protect the city, the defense must theoretically fire 20 interceptors. 20 interceptors at $4 million each equals $80 million. The adversary spends $1 million. The defender is forced to spend $80 million. This is an 80-to-1 economic disadvantage. If the warhead deploys 80 submunitions, as some Iranian generals have boasted, the cost to defend against a single launch spikes to over $300 million. No defense industrial base on the planet, not even the mighty American military-industrial complex, can sustain that kind of arithmetic attrition indefinitely. The economics of missile defense have been inverted completely. I'm curious to hear from those of you who have watched our defense budgets evolve over the decades. Can the American taxpayer realistically sustain a strategy where we spend $80 for every $1 our adversary spends? Please share your thoughts below, because this is a conversation our nation needs to have. You might be wondering how this happened. How does a nation, operating under some of the most severe economic and technological sanctions in modern history, outmaneuver the American military establishment and engineer such a perfect strategic trap? The answer does not lie in a sudden technological breakthrough, but in a long, methodical history of refinement, foreign technology transfer, and an acute, patient observation of American military vulnerabilities. For those of us who remember the Cold War, the lineage of this weapon is deeply familiar. The Khorramshahr-4 did not appear suddenly out of the desert sands. It is the fourth generation of a missile family that represents decades of painstaking learning. The original Khorramshahr was not even an Iranian invention. It was derived heavily from the North Korean Hwasong-10, which Pyongyang covertly sold to Tehran. That relationship between North Korea and Iran in the ballistic missile domain dates back to the 1980s, an era when Iran was desperately fighting the brutal Iran-Iraq War. Iraqi Scud missiles rained down on Iranian cities, and the Iranian leadership learned a permanent lesson. They needed their own indigenous missile program to guarantee their survival. Generation after generation, Iranian engineers have taken that baseline North Korean technology, which itself was an evolution of Soviet Cold War engineering, and systematically refined it. They strengthened the airframes, improved the guidance packages, and vastly increased the payload capacity. With the fourth generation, the K-bar, they redesigned the engine and the warhead section entirely to create a weapon that far exceeds anything North Korea originally provided. It is a marvel of asymmetric engineering. The missile is roughly 13 meters long and carries a warhead weighing between 1,500 and 1,800 kilograms. To put that into perspective, most medium-range ballistic missiles carry warheads in the 500 to 1,000 kilogram range. The Khorramshahr-4's payload capacity sits in an entirely different category, one previously associated almost exclusively with strategic nuclear delivery systems. It has a reported range of 2,000 kilometers, placing all of Israel, the vital Gulf states, and major American military hubs comfortably within its striking distance from deep inside Iranian territory. But the true, insidious genius of the K-bar lies in two specific engineering choices designed deliberately to neutralize American technological superiority. The first is its propulsion system, and the second is its navigation protocol. The engine of the Khorramshahr-4 is powered by what is known as hypergolic propellant. This is a specific type of liquid fuel that ignites spontaneously the moment the fuel comes into contact with its oxidizer. It requires no complex ignition system. While this might sound like a minor detail for aerospace engineers, its operational implications on the battlefield are profound. Historically, the great weakness of liquid-fueled ballistic missiles was that the fuel was highly corrosive and unstable. Missiles had to be stored empty. When a launch order was given, it took hours to fuel the rocket. This long preparation time created a massive vulnerability. American satellites and reconnaissance aircraft could detect the fueling operations, allowing U.S. strike aircraft to destroy the missile on the launch pad before it could ever be fired. Hypergolic propellant changes everything. Because it can be safely stored within the missile's internal tanks for years without degrading the airframe, the Khorramshahr-4 can sit deep inside a fortified subterranean bunker, fully fueled and ready. Upon receiving a launch order, the missile can be erected and fired in approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes is simply not enough time for an American satellite to detect the launch preparation, relay that data to a command center, task a stealth bomber, and destroy the launcher before the missile leaves the tube. The Iranians understood our preemptive strike doctrine, and they engineered a fuel system specifically to close that window of opportunity. Furthermore, the Khorramshahr-4 incorporates a mid-course navigation correction system that operates entirely outside the Earth's atmosphere. The missile uses an onboard inertial navigation system, aided by satellite positioning, to correct its flight path while it is cruising through the vacuum of space. This matters immensely because one of the primary American countermeasures against ballistic missiles is electronic warfare, jamming GPS signals and spoofing radar in the terminal phase of the missile's flight to make it miss its target. By designing the Khorramshahr-4 to finalize its navigation corrections in the exo-atmosphere, Iranian engineers ensured that by the time the warhead re-enters the atmosphere and comes within range of American electronic jamming, its trajectory is already permanently locked. It is entirely resistant to electronic warfare because it has already done its thinking before the jamming can reach it. This is the product of an adversary meticulously studying how their older missiles were intercepted in previous conflicts and systematically engineering out every single vulnerability they identified. All of this engineering, all of these tactical advantages, are in service of one ultimate, terrifying strategic goal. It's a concept that is currently keeping American defense planners awake at night, and it's known as magazine exhaustion. We must understand that Iran does not view the Khorramshahr-4 as a standalone silver bullet. It is a force multiplier, a key component in a highly engineered system of systems. The Iranian military doctrine is not designed to ensure that every single missile penetrates our defenses. Their objective is to create a probabilistic environment that fundamentally overwhelms the cognitive and physical limits of the defense grid. When an attack is launched, it is never just one type of missile. A modern salvo includes Shahed attack drones flying at low altitudes and slow speeds to draw fire from short-range defenses. It includes hypersonic glide vehicles that maneuver at extreme speeds to defeat high-altitude interceptors. It includes solid-fueled missiles launched from mobile trucks to evade counter-battery fire. And in the midst of this chaotic, multi-layered swarm comes the Khorramshahr-4. Imagine the radar picture in that scenario. The defense system must simultaneously track low-flying drones, high-arcing ballistic trajectories, and erratic hypersonic gliders. It must discriminate between real warheads and sophisticated decoys. It must allocate interceptors across multiple layers of defense, all within a window of a few minutes. And then, at 23,000 feet, the Khorramshahr warheads open. Suddenly, a handful of radar tracks multiply into dozens, perhaps hundreds of individual threats. The fire control computers must instantly reevaluate engagement priorities. The human operators are forced to make life or death decisions faster than human cognition is designed to function. Under this immense electronic and psychological strain, the defense system begins to leak. Missiles slip through, but the true peril lies in the magazines themselves. Missile defense batteries do not have infinite ammunition. A Patriot battery has a finite number of interceptor tubes. Resupplying these systems takes precious time, and manufacturing new interceptors takes years. During intensive conflict scenarios, the expenditure rate of these interceptors is staggering. Defending forces can burn through billions of dollars worth of interceptors in a matter of days. This is the math of saturation. The attacker forces the defender to spend irreplaceable interceptors at a rate that the domestic production chain cannot possibly match. If you are the commander of an air defense sector with 48 interceptors left and a salvo of 20 incoming missiles appears on your screen, you might have to fire 2 interceptors per track to guarantee a kill. Within minutes, defending against just 20 missiles consumes 40 of your interceptors. Your battery is essentially empty. And then the next wave appears on the radar. You do not defeat American missile defense in the first wave. The first wave is absorbed by our brilliant technology. You defeat American missile defense in the 5th wave, the 10th wave, the 15th wave, when the defender's magazines have been bled dry by the preceding salvos. The Khorramshahr-4, with its cluster warhead, is the ultimate accelerant for this magazine exhaustion. By multiplying the number of required intercepts per missile launched, it forces the United States and its allies to empty their silos at an exponentially faster rate. It is a weapon designed specifically to break the industrial capacity of the United States to defend itself. This crisis of interceptor stockpiles extends far beyond the Middle East. Every military theater on Earth is connected through the fragile supply chain of these critical munitions. If the United States is forced to expend thousands of Patriot and THAAD interceptors to counter Iranian cluster warheads, those are interceptors that cannot be deployed to the Indo-Pacific to deter aggression against Taiwan, or stationed in Eastern Europe to protect our NATO allies. The strategic gravity of the Khorramshahr-4 pulls American defensive resources away from every other global flashpoint, forcing agonizing choices upon our military leadership about which regions to protect and which to leave vulnerable. As we look at the broader implications of this weapon, there is also a deeply uncomfortable conversation to be had regarding the laws of armed conflict. The International Convention on Cluster Munitions, signed by over 100 nations, strictly prohibits the use, production, and stockpiling of these weapons because of their indiscriminate effects on civilian populations and their horrific legacy of unexploded ordnance. However, geopolitical reality requires clear eyes. Iran has not signed that convention, neither has Israel. And crucially, neither has the United States, which maintains its own massive stockpile of cluster munitions for potential use in major power conflicts. Because the major powers have reserved the right to use these weapons, the legal framework that governs much of modern warfare offers no protection here. When an Iranian ballistic missile scatters explosive bomblets across a residential neighborhood, it is operating within a terrifying loophole of international law. The humanitarian consequences are catastrophic, resulting in wide area destruction and crippling the emergency services that must respond to dozens of simultaneous blast sites. It is a deliberate strategic choice by the attacker to generate persistent fear and render large sections of infrastructure temporarily unusable. Beyond the immediate humanitarian and infrastructural devastation, we must take a moment to consider what this mathematical reality does to the psychology of our global alliances. For decades, the implicit promise of an American partnership was the provision of an impenetrable security umbrella. We sold Patriot batteries and THAAD systems, not just as military hardware, but as psychological guarantees. When an Allied capital or a forward-deployed base looks to the sky, they expect American engineering to sanitize that sky. The Khorramshahr-4 dismantles that guarantee. When regional partners realize that the American shield can be saturated and economically exhausted by a relatively cheap, submunition-deploying ballistic missile, their strategic calculus fundamentally alters. If the United States cannot guarantee defense by denial, meaning the physical interception, of the incoming threat, then Allied nations are increasingly forced to consider their own offensive and perhaps even nuclear deterrence. This weapon does not just threaten a city sector, it threatens the very architecture of American non-proliferation efforts and regional stability. Because we are losing the economic capacity for defense by denial, military strategists are being forced back toward a much darker, older doctrine: defense by punishment. This is the Cold War logic of mutually assured deterrence. It dictates that if we cannot afford to shoot down your missiles, we will guarantee such overwhelming, catastrophic retaliation against your soil that you will never launch them in the first place. But there's a critical flaw in applying that logic to the current theater. It requires a symmetrical fear of escalation. We are dealing with an adversary that has spent 40 years operating in the gray zone, utilizing proxy forces, and demonstrating a remarkably high tolerance for economic and infrastructural pain. When an adversary is willing to absorb immense punishment to achieve its strategic goals, the threat of retaliation loses its paralyzing effect. We find ourselves in a high-stakes standoff where the enemy holds a cheap, reliable sword, and our expensive shield is cracking. Many of you watching live through the heights of the Cold War and understand deterrence better than anyone. This brings us to a critical crossroads. Should we return to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or is there another way to counter this threat? I read every comment, and I'd love to know how you would advise our military leadership to handle this modern standoff. Naturally, the Pentagon is not sitting idle while this mathematical crisis unfolds. There is a desperate, heavily funded scramble to find a technological way out of the cost exchange trap. The most widely discussed alternative is the deployment of directed energy weapons, specifically high-energy lasers and high-power microwave systems. In theory, a laser system solves the economic inversion. The cost per shot of a laser is essentially the cost of the diesel fuel required to run the electrical generator, perhaps $10 to $50 an engagement compared to a $4 million Patriot. It offers an infinitely deep magazine, limited only by its power supply. However, we must separate laboratory promise from battlefield reality. Today's directed energy weapons are primarily effective against slow-moving, low-altitude targets like surveillance and attack drones. They are severely degraded by atmospheric conditions such as dust storms, heavy rain, and thermal blooming. More importantly, it requires immense, sustained, and perfectly focused thermal energy to burn through the hardened, heat-shielded casing of a ballistic missile moving at terminal velocity. Even if a megawatt-class laser could eventually engage a Khorramshahr-4, by the time the missile reaches the 23,000-foot threshold and opens to release its cluster payload, the physics of the engagement are already lost. A laser simply cannot track, focus on, and melt 20 independent, rapidly falling submunitions simultaneously. The technology that will supposedly save us from this economic trap is still years, perhaps decades, away from operational maturity at this strategic scale. So, as we face these sobering facts, what is the reality of modern warfare that we must now confront? The uncomfortable truth is that we have reached the absolute limits of a purely defensive strategy based on intercepting incoming fire. We cannot reliably intercept all the submunitions after they scatter. They are simply too small, too numerous, and possess no guidance systems to disrupt. We cannot guarantee the interception of the missile before the cluster opens, because no defense system is impenetrable. We cannot afford to fire enough interceptors to achieve certainty, because the 80-to-1 economic ratio will bankrupt our defense budgets and empty our arsenals in a matter of days. And finally, we cannot easily rely on destroying the launchers before they fire, because finding every mobile launcher hidden within vast underground missile cities across a mountainous country the size of Iran is an operational challenge that pushes the boundaries of even American air supremacy. For nearly 3/4 of a century, the United States has relied on the unassailable premise that American technological and industrial superiority could shield us and our allies from the world's most dangerous threats. We believed that if we built a smart enough radar and a fast enough interceptor, we could buy security from the skies. The Khorramshahr-4 is a stark, undeniable signal that this era is coming to a close. We are facing an adversary that has not tried to outbuild us or out-innovate our most advanced microchips. Instead, they have studied our doctrine, calculated the cost of our defenses, and engineered a remarkably simple, brutal workaround. They have built a $1 million weapon that turns the immutable laws of economics, arithmetic, and gravity against the defender. This is the paradigm shift of our time. We can no longer assume that the shield will hold simply because it is expensive and technologically complex. Moving forward, the defense of our nation and our interests will require a profound rethinking of our strategic posture, a shift away from attempting to catch every falling arrow, and a sobering realization that in the modern era of asymmetric warfare, the math simply does not favor the defender. Thank you for your time today. If you found this analysis valuable, please share it with others who care deeply about the future of our national security. And before you go, please leave a comment below. How do you think the United States should adapt its strategy in this new era of warfare? I look forward to reading your insights.